Pasta sauce aisle is one of the biggest deceptions in your grocery store. Right now, contain almost no real tomatoes. And the scary part, some of them cost $10 a jar. The pasta sauce aisle is one of the biggest deceptions in your entire grocery store. Every single jar promises Italy. Every label shows sun-ripened tomatoes and rustic kitchens. But flip it over and read the ingredients, and a completely different story starts. Modified food starch, added sugar, soybean oil, something called natural flavor that legally means almost nothing. Today we're exposing 5 brands you should put straight back on the shelf, counting down to the worst offender. A sauce that's been America's #1 for over 40 years, while using ingredients that exist only to fake what real tomatoes were supposed to do. Then we're revealing 5 brands that actually have real tomatoes inside. Every fact in this video comes directly from the ingredient label. Let's get into it. Number 5. Berolei tomato and basil. The one engineered to look like a premium import. Berolei built its entire identity around one word: Italian. The name, the confident label design, the font, and above everything else, olive oil. It's not just an ingredient in this product, it's a positioning statement. It's the thing Berolei wants you to believe separates this jar from every generic option sitting next to it on the shelf. The implication is clear. This is the sauce made with real olive oil, the way it would actually be made in Italy, by people who care about the difference. Now read the back panel. Berolei tomato and basil is manufactured in the United States, not imported, domestic. And that olive oil being used as the brand's central credibility claim? It appears in quantities so small it contributes essentially nothing to the actual flavor of the sauce. You are not tasting olive oil. You are tasting a sauce that lists olive oil as an ingredient. Those are not the same thing, and that distinction is exactly what the front label is designed to blur. Modified cornstarch appears within the first 8 ingredients. That is not a minor detail. That is the structural explanation for why this sauce feels thick. Modified cornstarch is an industrial thickening agent. It's in this formula because the tomato base alone doesn't have enough body to feel like a real sauce. The thickening that should happen naturally when you slowly simmer quality tomatoes down, concentrating their sugars, deepening their flavor, building natural viscosity, is instead being produced by a starch additive before the jar is ever sealed. The result is a faint starchy coating on your palate after each bite that no amount of olive oil mentioned on the label can address. The sweetness is also a tell. The sauce is noticeably sweet in a way that ripe tomatoes don't naturally produce unless they've been grown and harvested correctly. That rounded generic sweetness is what you get when the tomato base is thin and the formula needs something to make it feel complete. At $5 to $6, you're paying a premium price for a sweetened, starch-padded tomato product wearing Italian branding as a costume. The label is doing work the contents cannot. The next brand doesn't even try to look premium, and somehow that almost makes it worse. Number 4. Hunt's traditional pasta sauce. The affordable one that doesn't pretend to be anything else. Hunt's costs under $2. It tastes like something that costs under $2. And unlike most brands on this avoid list, it isn't trying to convince you otherwise. No Italian village on the label, no borrowed heritage, no premium positioning. Hunt's is the straightforward budget option, which would be a reasonable category to occupy if what was inside were actually worth cooking with. The flavor is tomato adjacent. It identifies the basic category: acidic, slightly savory, vaguely sweet, without committing to any of those qualities convincingly. No depth, no development. It tastes like someone described tomato sauce from memory, and this is what got manufactured from that description. There's a flatness to it that becomes more obvious the more you pay attention. The texture is the functional failure. It doesn't cling. It doesn't coat. You toss the pasta, and within 30 seconds the sauce has pooled at the bottom of the bowl. A pasta sauce that can't stay on pasta isn't performing its primary function. That's not a flavor preference, that's a structural problem with the formula. There's one thing worth noting, and it's genuinely relevant. The ingredient list is shorter than most in this tier. Tomatoes, tomato puree, salt, sugar, spices. No modified starch, no added oils, no emulsifiers. In terms of additive load, that's genuinely more restrained than several sauces charging 3 times as much. The simplicity is real, but sugar is listed. And sugar in a tomato sauce is always the same signal. The tomatoes couldn't produce enough natural sweetness on their own, so it was added afterward to patch the gap. The spices listed are a catch-all that tells you nothing specific, around 550 milligrams of sodium per half-cup serving, which adds up quickly if you're using a realistic amount on a full plate of pasta. Hunt's is the most transparent underperformer on this list. It isn't deceiving you about what it is. It just isn't worth cooking with when better options exist at only a few dollars more. And the brand coming up next charges you 3 times as much to deliver roughly the same experience, inside a significantly more convincing container. Number 3, Classico tomato and basil, the one that charges you for the jar. Classico costs $5 to $7, and it comes in glass. That glass jar is doing more work than anything inside it. The name implies something classical and deliberate. The refined label communicates a step above, the sauce you reach for when you want to feel intentional about dinner without fully committing to reading what's actually in the bottle. Classico understood that customer precisely and built a product for them. The design does the selling, the contents don't have to. Open it and the texture is smooth to the point of having no character at all. No tomato pieces, no variation, no evidence of a vegetable that once existed in a natural, unprocessed state. It's been worked into a uniform smoothness, the kind you only achieve when consistency at scale matters more than flavor from a real ingredient. There's nothing in the texture to suggest a tomato was ever chunky, seedy, or irregularly shaped, the way tomatoes actually are. The basil registers the way a scented candle registers, technically present, noticeable in the most peripheral way, doing nothing meaningful for the flavor of the food you're about to eat. Here's the ingredient detail that reveals the most about this product. Classico lists both citric acid and natural flavor as additives alongside the tomatoes. Tomatoes are naturally acidic. That's one of their defining characteristics as an ingredient. If a tomato sauce requires added citric acid as a separate ingredient, it means the tomatoes in the formula were not producing enough natural acidity on their own to create a balanced, pleasant flavor. The acidity had to be manufactured and added after the fact. That's a sourcing problem dressed up as an ingredient choice. Natural flavor is the food industry's all-purpose opacity clause. It can mean almost anything, a blend of compounds that produce a desired sensory effect, and manufacturers are not required to tell you what those compounds actually are. In a sauce whose entire purpose is to taste like tomatoes, the presence of natural flavor means the tomatoes alone weren't doing enough. Something else had to be added to make this taste like what it's supposed to be. 450 milligrams of sodium per half cup. $5 to $7 per jar. The glass did the convincing. What's inside didn't have to. The 2 brands coming up next charge comparable money and ask you to trust them even further, and the ingredient list is where that trust begins to fall apart. 3 down, 2 more on the avoid list. Then we get into the 5 actually worth buying. The best one on that list might genuinely change how you shop in this aisle. Number 2, Ragu Old World Style Traditional. The one families have trusted for decades. Old World Style Traditional is one of the more ambitious pieces of marketing language on this entire list. It implies craft. It implies time. It implies a recipe that came from somewhere real, developed by someone who knew what they were doing, and preserved carefully enough to be reproduced at industrial scale without losing what made it worth making in the first place. Now look at the actual ingredient list. Tomato puree, water, soybean oil, salt, sugar, dehydrated onions, citric acid, spice, natural flavor. The soybean oil is the tell. Oil doesn't belong in pasta sauce. It's in this formula for one specific reason. The tomato-to-water ratio isn't substantial enough on its own to feel like a real sauce. Without added oil to create body, What's left would be too thin to function as something you'd willingly put on pasta. So instead of sourcing better tomatoes that could carry their own weight, this formula adds soybean oil to simulate a richness the base ingredient genuinely doesn't possess. You are eating oil-emulsified tomato water that has been seasoned to smell and look like something Italian. The flavor structure confirms exactly that. There's a front-end burst of something tomato-adjacent, aggressive, for about 3 seconds, and then it drops out completely. No mid-palate development, no finish. Just salt and the memory of something that briefly tasted like sauce. The texture alternates between thin and strangely thick, in a way that has nothing to do with natural variation in tomato pieces, and everything to do with multiple thickeners working imperfectly against each other. 600 milligrams of sodium per half cup. Added sugar on the ingredient list. Dehydrated onions instead of fresh. $2 to $3 a jar, which sounds like genuine value until you understand that the value is entirely in the label, not what the label is protecting. Ragu's survival is built on price and shelf presence. They're in every store, they're the cheapest clearly visible option in the aisle, and they're betting on you not pausing to ask why a sauce with this many ingredients still manages to taste like very little. The brand coming up next has been running that same strategy for longer at a far larger scale with significantly more confidence. And it is, by a wide margin, the single most purchased pasta sauce in America. Number 1. Prego Traditional. The one that's been in your life since before you were making your own grocery decisions. Prego launched in 1981. Over 40 years on the same shelves in virtually every grocery store in America. That kind of shelf presence doesn't happen because a product is exceptional. It happens because a product becomes the default. And defaults are extraordinarily difficult to dislodge once they're established. You don't choose Prego. You reach for it. The same way you reach for any object that has occupied the same space in your peripheral vision for your entire adult life. In that time, Prego has perfected one specific thing. Tasting inoffensive enough that you never feel strongly enough to stop buying it. That is not a compliment. That is a calculated business outcome. The flavor is what you get when the design goal is to produce something that registers as tomato sauce without triggering any negative reaction strong enough to prompt a switch. It doesn't taste wrong, it doesn't taste particularly right, it tastes like the broadest possible interpretation of the category, acidic enough to be recognizable as sauce, sweet enough not to be sharp, smooth enough not to surprise anyone. It is a flavor profile built to generate the fewest complaints, not the most satisfaction. The sweetness is the first thing that arrives, and it is not the sweetness of a ripe, well-grown tomato. Added sugar appears in the first few ingredients. In a pasta sauce, sugar is not a seasoning choice. It is a correction. It means the tomatoes used in this formula are not naturally sweet enough to produce a balanced product, so sweetness is added industrially to fill the gap that the ingredient itself couldn't close. Here is the number that reframes this jar completely. A half-cup serving, roughly 4 tablespoons of sauce, contains 650 milligrams of sodium. That is 28% of the recommended daily intake in 4 tablespoons. If you've ever cooked pasta for yourself, you know 4 tablespoons barely covers 1 corner of 1 portion. A realistic single-serving amount is closer to a cup and a half. Apply that multiplier to the sodium number and think about how often this jar gets opened in a household that's using it regularly. The ingredient list puts tomato puree first, which is technically fine. Tomato puree is just tomatoes and water. But within the next 5 ingredients, you encounter modified food starch, sugar, and natural flavor. Modified food starches in this formula to make the sauce feel more substantial than the tomato base alone is capable of feeling. Natural flavor is in this formula because the tomatoes weren't producing enough flavor for the product to taste convincingly like what it's supposed to be. These are not supporting characters, they are structural components. Remove them and what's left isn't a product that can sell at this volume. Prego exists on every shelf in every store because it became the automatic choice before most shoppers had any reason to question it. Their business model depends entirely on that moment. 12 minutes to dinner. Familiar label, cart already moving. The second you flip this jar over and read it carefully, the 40-year story begins to look very different from the one on the front. This is the most purchased pasta sauce in America. That fact tells you considerably more about how grocery shopping actually works than it tells you about how this sauce actually tastes. Now that you know what to put back, here is what to reach for instead. These 5 brands looked at the same ingredient options, the same cost pressures, and the same shelf competition, and made fundamentally different decisions. Those decisions show up on the ingredient list first. They show up on the plate immediately after. Best option number 3. Muir Glen Organic Tomato Basil. The clean mid-price choice. That proves the $5 tier doesn't have to mean compromise. Muir Glen grows its tomatoes in California's Sacramento Valley. That is the entire pitch. No borrowed Italian mythology. No invented grandmother. No village illustration on the label. Just tomatoes from a specific named place, grown using organic farming practices, processed without a chemistry intervention to make them taste like something they aren't. The texture is the first difference you notice, and it's immediately meaningful. Visible tomato pieces, chunks that confirm a real vegetable was involved and wasn't processed into anonymity. Natural variation in consistency that happens when you don't over-homogenize the base ingredient. It moves and behaves the way food made from real ingredients actually behaves, which sounds like a low bar until you've spent time with the avoid list and understood how consistently that bar goes uncleared. The basil is herbal, present, and integrated into the sauce, rather than announced on top of it. It behaves the way basil actually behaves when it's genuinely part of the recipe from the beginning, not dried and added at the end as a label qualifier. The full ingredient list: organic tomatoes, organic tomato puree, organic extra virgin olive oil, organic onion, sea salt, organic garlic, organic basil, organic black pepper, citric acid. 9 ingredients. Every one of them is identifiable as a real food except the citric acid, which in this context is being used for preservation in a jarred product, a legitimate and common application. Critically, it is not here to artificially sharpen a flavor the tomatoes were supposed to produce and didn't. That distinction separates this use of citric acid from what you saw in the Classico formula. 310 milligrams of sodium per half cup. The lowest sodium count of anything on the avoid list and competitive with everything in the best section. $5 to $7. The exact same price range as Classico and Berolei. Identical price point. Completely different contents and completely different ingredient logic. The gap isn't explained by packaging, it's explained entirely by what went into the jar. What comes next shows what this same clean approach looks like when a brand pushes every element of it further. If this breakdown is useful, if you found a jar on the avoid list you've been buying without realizing what was in it, a quick like helps this kind of investigation reach more people. Takes 1 second. Best option number 2. Ragu's homemade marinara, the one that changed what jarred sauce was allowed to be. Ragu's gets talked about constantly. For once in the jarred sauce category, the attention is proportionate to what's actually in the jar. This isn't a brand that became popular through aggressive marketing or wide distribution. It became talked about because people opened it, tasted it, and couldn't explain why it was so different from everything else on the shelf. The ingredient list is the explanation. This is a sauce that tastes cooked, not manufactured, not assembled from components and stabilized for shelf life. Cooked, with visible evidence of the decisions made during that process. The texture is loose and genuinely uneven. Olive oil sits on the surface. Tomato pieces vary in size. Herbs are visible. It doesn't hold a uniform shape because nothing was done to enforce uniformity. A real sauce made in a real kitchen doesn't come out of the pot looking like it was formed in a mold. Ragu's doesn't either. The flavor has an arc. That single quality, more than anything else, separates this sauce from everything in the avoid section. Most jarred sauces deliver one front-loaded note, usually sweet, and then disappear. Ragu's develops across the palate. There's a beginning, a middle, and a finish that's worth staying for, because the base ingredient is strong enough to sustain the whole experience without additives doing the structural work underneath it. The ingredient list: Italian plum tomatoes, olive oil, onions, salt, garlic, basil, black pepper, oregano. 8 ingredients: no sugar, no starch, no citric acid, no natural flavor, no soybean oil, no modified anything. For a product sitting in a jar at room temperature on a store shelf, that list is close to extraordinary. The reason it's achievable comes back to the tomatoes. Ragu uses San Marzano-style Italian plum tomatoes, a variety with lower water content and higher natural sugar concentration than standard commercial tomato varieties. Because the tomatoes are naturally sweet, no added sugar is needed. Because they're naturally acidic, no citric acid is needed. Because they have genuine flavor depth, no natural flavor needs to be invented to supplement what's there. When the base ingredient is actually exceptional, the additive list becomes structurally unnecessary. That is the clearest and most direct demonstration of this entire video's central argument, visible on a single ingredient panel. $8 to $10 a jar. That's real money for pasta sauce, and plenty of people hesitate at that price point. What you're paying for is the tomatoes and the decision not to cut corners around them. The next option is the only one on this list that takes the underlying principle even further, and it asks one specific thing more from you in the kitchen. Best option number 1. Sento San Marzano organic crushed tomatoes. The one that wins by being almost nothing at all. Here is what separates Cento San Marzano organic crushed tomatoes from everything else covered in this video. It is not a finished sauce. It makes no attempt to be a finished sauce, and that is precisely why it ranks first. This is crushed San Marzano tomatoes from the Agro-Cernesi-Nocerino region of Italy, a geographically specific area of volcanic soil at the base of Mount Vesuvius where the mineral composition, drainage characteristics, and local microclimate combine to produce a tomato variety that is naturally sweeter, less acidic, and more flavor complex than virtually any commercially grown tomato from anywhere else. That is not marketing language placed on a label. That is the documented agricultural explanation for why San Marzano tomatoes have been the professional kitchen standard for generations across Italian cooking and serious restaurant kitchens worldwide. Open the can, and the difference is immediate and visual before you've tasted anything. The liquid is a clear, bright red, not the murky, opaque color that comes from tomatoes that have been overprocessed, diluted, or blended beyond recognition. The flesh is intact. The seeds are present. The tomato looks like a tomato that was harvested, crushed, and canned, because that is what happened to it, without much else in between. The flavor is pure in a way that takes a moment to adjust to if you've been eating jarred sauces for years. Not rounded off by added sugar, not sharpened by added citric acid, not supplemented by natural flavor compounds. It tastes like an exceptional tomato because that is what it is, and that is genuinely the only thing it's trying to be. There's a natural sweetness, a clean acidity, and a savory depth that come entirely from the fruit itself, not from anything added to the can after the fact. Full ingredient list. Organic San Marzano whole-peeled tomatoes, organic tomato juice, sea salt. 3 ingredients. The basil version adds one more. That is the complete document. No starch, no sugar, no citric acid, no natural flavor, no oil added to simulate richness the tomatoes don't actually have. Nothing in this can that isn't supposed to be here. $5 to $7 for a 28-ounce can. Around 260 milligrams of sodium per half cup, the lowest number at any point in this video, across either list. And one more piece of information that separates this from every other claim in that aisle. DOP certification, Denominazione di Origine Protetta, a protected designation of origin that is not a marketing phrase. It is a legal classification enforced by the Italian government requiring independent verification that these tomatoes come from that specific geographic region and meet specific documented production standards. If those standards aren't maintained, the certification is revoked. The label has to change. That external accountability, the kind that has real consequences, exists nowhere else in this comparison. The honest trade-off is straightforward and worth stating clearly. This is not a pour and serve product. You will finish it yourself, garlic and olive oil in a pan, crushed tomatoes added, 20 minutes of simmering, seasoning adjusted to your preference as it reduces. That is more work than unscrewing a jar and pouring. What you get at the end is a pasta sauce you controlled entirely from the beginning, built on a 3-ingredient base using tomatoes grown in the most suitable place on earth for growing them, with an ingredient list you could read aloud in under 10 seconds. Cento is number one not because it does everything for you. It's number one because it gives you the best possible starting material and then steps aside completely. Here's what this investigation actually comes down to. The pasta sauce aisle is designed around one goal: preventing you from reading the back of the jar before it goes in the cart. Every design decision on every bottle, the colors, the names, the imagery, the evocative words like homemade and traditional and old world and vine ripened, exists to generate enough front label confidence that the ingredient panel never gets consulted. You feel like you already know what's in there. That feeling is the product. That strategy has worked for decades, at scale, across hundreds of millions of purchases for every brand in the avoid section. The brands on that avoid list, Berolei, Hunt's, Classico, Ragu, Prego, aren't on every shelf because they make a superior product. They're there because they got there first, they stayed familiar, and the gap between what the front label promises and what the ingredient list actually delivers has never been made visible at the moment of purchase. At checkout, familiarity wins almost every time. The brands on the best list, Muir Glen, Ragu, Cento, aren't doing anything technically complicated or inaccessible. They are using better tomatoes and leaving out everything that exists to compensate for tomatoes that aren't good enough on their own. The ingredient list gets shorter not because they cut things that matter, but because there's genuinely less that needs to be there. When the base ingredient is doing its job correctly, you don't need starch to fake body, sugar to fake sweetness, oil to fake richness, or natural flavor to fake depth. The tomato handles all of it. When the ingredient list gets shorter, the food starts to taste like the thing it actually is. That is the entire story of this aisle, condensed to one sentence. One action, every grocery run in that section from this point forward. Flip the jar over before it goes in the cart. Not the front, not the calorie count. The ingredient list. If sugar appears in the first 5 ingredients, the tomatoes couldn't generate enough natural sweetness on their own. If you see the word modified attached to anything, an industrial process is doing structural work that a better tomato would have made completely unnecessary. If natural flavor appears in a product whose entire purpose is to taste like tomatoes, the tomatoes in the formula needed help, and the company made a deliberate choice not to tell you what kind of help or why it was needed. You are not being asked to become a food scientist. You are being asked to read a list of things someone put in a jar and decided to sell to you as a meal. The brands that deserve your money have nothing on that list they'd prefer you didn't look at. The ones that belong back on the shelf, you now know exactly what to look for. If there's a jar on that avoid list currently sitting in your kitchen, you now have 3 specific alternatives to replace it with. Drop a comment with what you're switching from and what you're moving to. Genuinely useful to see what people are actually reaching for out there.